Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into what is absolutely the highest stakes survival game on Earth. I'm talking about a biological balancing act that every single animal plays literally every second of every day. We're exploring the super fascinating world of fluid balance and excretion. You see, the fundamental chemistry of life, it happens in water. But nature doesn't exactly go around handing out perfectly balanced glasses of water to every creature, right? Environments can be incredibly harsh, completely dry, or overwhelmingly salty. So animals basically have to act like they are managing this strict, high-stakes currency of water and dissolved solutes just to avoid total physiological bankruptcy. We're going to look at some incredible evolutionary hacks that allow life to just absolutely thrive in the most extreme places you can imagine.
Now, to really set the stage here, I want you to consider the wandering albatross. This is a massive bird, right? It's got a 3.5-meter wingspan, and it spends essentially its entire life out at sea, only coming back to land to reproduce. Now think about this for a second. If you or I were lost at sea and drank only pure seawater, we would quickly die of severe dehydration. Our bodies just simply cannot process that much salt without burning through our own internal water reserves to flush it out. Yet, faced with those exact same conditions, the albatross drinks pure seawater and absolutely thrives. So how on earth does it do that without dying?
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for The Explainer. First, the water balancing act. Second, osmoconformers versus osmoregulators. Third, excretion and fluid balance. Fourth, the nitrogenous waste problem. And finally, the desert masters of survival. Section 1. The Water Balancing Act. The biological stakes of homeostasis. Think of every single cell in an animal's body as being in this constant, never-ending tug-of-war against its environment. It requires the relative concentrations of water and solutes, things like sodium and calcium, to be kept within some pretty narrow limits. And that brings us to osmoregulation. This is the process by which animals control those solute concentrations and balance their water gain and loss. The driving force behind all this is osmosis, where water naturally moves across a membrane based on concentration gradients. And the stakes for getting this wrong, they are immediate and lethal. If water uptake is too high, animal cells will physically swell up and burst. On the flip side, if water loss is too extreme, the cells just shrivel up and die. So, to safeguard their internal fluids, animals have to strictly, relentlessly regulate this movement. Moving right along to Section 2, Osmoconformers versus Osmoregulators, the two main strategies to survive.
So the crucial point here is that every animal basically falls into one of two camps when dealing with the environment's solute concentration. It's essentially the choice between going with the flow or fighting the environment. Take osmoconformers, like a lot of marine invertebrates. Their internal osmolarity is exactly the same as their environment. Because they're isoosmotic with the seawater around them, there's no real tendency to gain or lose water. It's a great energy-saving strategy for sure, but it completely restricts them to highly stable marine environments. Then, on the other hand, you have osmoregulators. These animals control their internal osmolarity totally independent of the outside world. Now, this costs energy because they have to actively pump solutes in or out against concentration gradients. But the massive payoff? It allows them to live in places that are completely uninhabitable for conformers, like freshwater lakes or even dry land.
Let's break this down a bit more to really visualize how these osmoregulators hack their specific habitats. Think about the life of a bony fish. A marine fish lives in the ocean, right? That's a hyperosmotic environment, which means it's constantly sucking water out of the fish's body. To avoid drying out like a raisin, it actively drinks lots of seawater and tirelessly excretes the excess salt through its gills and kidneys. But what about a freshwater fish? It lives in a hypoosmotic environment, meaning water is literally constantly flooding into its body. If it doesn't get rid of that water, its cells will pop. So its strategy is the exact opposite. It drinks almost no water at all, and it constantly bails itself out by excreting massive amounts of highly dilute urine. It's just brilliant. Two completely opposite physiological hacks for two totally different, high-contrast environments.
Section 3. Excretion and fluid balance. Meet the internal janitor.
Well, getting rid of excess water or salt isn't the whole story. The body also desperately needs an internal janitor. Animals produce metabolic waste just from, well, being alive. And getting rid of this internal trash is intimately, deeply tied to water conservation. That brings us to excretion, the process of ridding the body of nitrogenous metabolites and other waste products. Structurally and functionally, the systems for osmoregulation and excretion are super linked in many animals. You simply can't throw out the biological trash without throwing out at least a little bit of water, too, so the body has to be incredibly smart about how it packages and removes that waste. Let's move to and see how this builds, because across a vast range of animal species, we're talking from earthworms all the way up to humans, this janitorial work happens in 4 key steps, all built on a universal tubular theme. First up, filtration. Blood or body fluid is forced by pressure across a membrane, pushing water and small solutes into a tubule to form what we call a filtrate. Second, reabsorption. The body absolutely cannot afford to lose all of that, so transport epithelia step in to reclaim valuable stuff like glucose, amino acids, and water, pulling them right back into the bloodstream. Third, secretion. Any additional non-essential solutes and toxins are actively extracted from the body fluids and dumped into the tubule. And finally, step 4, excretion. This highly processed, altered filtrate, which we now officially call urine, leaves the system and exits the body.
Section 4. The nitrogenous waste problem. Toxic trash and evolutionary trade-offs.
So what exactly is in this toxic trash anyway? When an animal digests food, specifically when it's breaking down proteins and nucleic acids for energy, enzymes remove nitrogen in the form of ammonia. And listen, ammonia is intensely toxic. It is so toxic, in fact, that its ammonium ion can literally interfere with oxidative phosphorylation. That's a fancy way of saying it suffocates the cell's ability to make energy. Because it's so incredibly dangerous, ammonia can only be tolerated in the body at extremely low concentrations, which means it requires massive amounts of water to safely dilute it before excretion.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it clearly lays out the harsh evolutionary trade-offs animals face based entirely on where they live. Aquatic species excrete straight ammonia. The energy cost to make it is really low, but the water loss is extremely high, which honestly is perfectly fine when you're literally swimming in water. But mammals and adult amphibians, we don't have that luxury. We have to spend pretty high amounts of energy to convert that ammonia into urea. Its toxicity is much lower, meaning we can excrete it with only moderate water loss. And then we have birds and reptiles. They go a step further and convert ammonia into uric acid. The energy cost to synthesize this is remarkably high, but its toxicity is very low, and crucially, it doesn't really dissolve in water. It can be excreted as this semi-solid paste, resulting in practically zero water loss.
So this all boils down to one central biological rule. The type and amount of nitrogenous waste a species produces are matched perfectly to its environment. Just think about a bird developing inside an eggshell. If that tiny embryo produced soluble ammonia or even urea, that toxic waste would just build up in the liquid of the egg and kill it. But by producing insoluble uric acid instead, it simply stores the waste as a totally harmless solid that gets left behind when it hatches. It's just a flawless evolutionary adaptation. Section 5. Desert Masters of Survival. Pushing the limits of biology. Okay, now let's look at the animals pushing these biological limits to the absolute maximum. When we talk about surviving terrestrial dehydration, just take a look at this number, 25%. A camel can lose 25% of its entire body water and still survive. They can also tolerate a 7 degrees Celsius rise in their body temperature, which stops them from sweating and losing fluid in the first place. To put that into some terrifying perspective regarding our own human frailty, if one of us loses just half that amount, so about 12.5% of our body water, we will literally die from heart failure.
But hey, as impressive as the camel is, you've got to consider the sandy inland mouse of Australia. This incredible little desert mammal can survive indefinitely, literally its entire life, on a diet of dried seeds, which are only about 10% water by weight. And get this, they do it without ever drinking a single drop of liquid water, not one drop. They pull this off by having highly specialized kidneys that furiously reabsorb almost every conceivable molecule of water before excretion.
Which brings us to another desert champion, the Australian hopping mouse, and a truly staggering number, 9,300 milliosmoles per liter. That is the osmolarity of its urine. For some context here, human blood is about 300 milliosmoles per liter. This mouse's urine is 25 times more concentrated than its own blood. It achieves this absolute magic through long microscopic kidney structures called loops of Henle. These act as energy-consuming machines, actively pumping salt to create steep osmotic gradients that just suck water right back into the body, leaving only the most intensely concentrated waste behind.
And this brilliantly illustrates how deeply these desert animals have adapted. A kangaroo rat ingests exactly 0 milliliters of liquid water daily.
It gets a tiny, almost negligible 0.2 milliliters of moisture from its food. But its real secret? The 1.8 milliliters of water derived directly from its own cellular metabolism. It literally generates its own daily water budget just through the chemical process of breathing and running its cells. And because its excretory system is so absurdly efficient, this tiny metabolic trickle is all it takes to keep it completely alive and well.
So, we started with the wandering albatross drinking the ocean, and we end with desert mice surviving without ever taking a sip of water. It shows us that life, through the precise architecture of transport epithelia and kidney tubules, can conquer almost any environment on Earth. But it definitely leaves us with a compelling question. As we study these incredible biological hacks, from specialized salt glands to ultra-concentrated urine, what are the absolute limits of human survival? As our own environments change and become more extreme, understanding how the rest of the animal kingdom masters fluid balance might just be the most important survival game we ever study. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your curiosity flowing.